So, welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with the founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So, this is episode 161, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Ravi Mehta, who's currently a product advisor. So, Ravi has some really incredible product and marketplace experience, previously being the chief product officer at Tinder, product director at Facebook. Before that, was a VP of product at Tripadvisor. Ravi has also shared lots of posts about product marketplaces on his blog that are constantly being referenced. So Ravi is also an early group chat guest when we first started the community. So it's great to welcome him back on, where we start off by doing a quick refresher on his background, what some of his key product and marketplace learnings were. Ravi walked us through a framework for how early stage marketplaces can capture and keep demand. He shared more about how Tripadvisor evolved into being a transactional marketplace. We discussed lots of topics like hiring your first PM, how AI is going to impact marketplaces. We also had a great group Q&A. I really enjoyed this conversation, and you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So, Ravi, I mentioned it before we started recording, but I believe it's been, 3 years now since your past group chat. So we're definitely overdue for a follow-up, and I'm really excited to have you join us here today. We'd like to start off by saying a huge thanks for taking the time to do so in advance. So we have lots of product and marketplace topics to chat about. But before we do, I think it might be great if you start off by briefly sharing your background as a quick refresher, and also for those that have just joined us here and might not know you outside of your awesome post.
Yeah, definitely. So hey everyone, I'm Ravi. Good to be with you today. I'm particularly excited. I've done a lot of marketplace work, and I know that it can be both challenging and exciting to be a marketplace founder. So I'm excited to chat with all of you today. I have been a consumer product guy my entire life, my entire career. I started programming when I was young. I was about 9 years old, and my dad brought home a computer. And back then, not to date myself, there wasn't much to do on it other than to learn how to code. So I started making games and making apps. I dropped out of college for a little bit to do that full time. Then went back to school and got really fortunate. I was looking at a lot of different engineering jobs, and I just happened to go for an interview to Microsoft, where at the time Microsoft wanted to make a big push into games. I didn't realize what it was going to be, but I thought the company was interesting and exciting, and I found out shortly after I joined that was the Xbox. And so I joined as one of the first 20 or so people on the Xbox team. Spent about 6 years at Microsoft working on various parts of Xbox, on the game side, on the platform side. And then ever since then, I've had sort of two threads throughout my career. I've been focused entirely on consumer product and almost entirely on products that connect people together. So some products that have some social element. I was the head of consumer product at Tripadvisor, where I led our user review team, hotels, restaurants, attractions. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today. There were some really interesting things that happened at Tripadvisor while I was there. I led a team focused on Gen Z at Facebook. We were trying to understand, how are social media behavior is changing. This was in the 2017 timeframe. What was the role that Instagram and Snap, and at the time it was Musical.ly before TikTok acquired it, were going to play moving forward. And so I had some interesting experiences there. I was a chief product officer at Tinder, so really helping them think about how to scale their product team, how to think about what dating and social discovery is going to look like for this next generation. And then since about 2020, I've mostly been focused on entrepreneurial things. I started a company called Outpace, which was focused on democratizing access to executive coaching. We did some really interesting work around AI as a way to both make coaches more efficient and as a way to provide a first line of coaching to users. And then this year, I've been doing mostly consulting and advising work. I stepped in as CPO of a company called Sesame, which is a healthcare marketplace, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So really interesting to think about how to build a marketplace in a market that traditionally doesn't operate like a traditional marketplace. And then I've been doing some other work, sort of helping 0 to 1 founders in certain cases, as well as advising other folks building consumer, social, and sometimes marketplace products. So really excited to be with you and share some of what I've discovered along the way.
Yeah, no, that's a really incredible, background experience. So a lot we're going to get into here, but I guess, to start off with, and maybe from a high level, what are some of your key product and marketplace learnings, that you find yourself sharing with founders and teams today?
Yeah, I was reflecting on it a couple of years ago when I was working with Reforge. We would do these really fun jam sessions to think about hard questions. And one of the hardest questions for marketplaces is how do you generate demand? Because if you have demand, oftentimes supply will follow. And so demand is often the harder side of the market than supply is. There are definitely exceptions to that, but that's a general rule. And for marketplaces, the question is, how do we capture demand? And how do we keep customer demand? Because once a person has met a supplier on our platform, what's going to actually keep them using our platform versus just wanting to transact directly with the supplier? And I think if you just boil it down to 5 things, especially for early marketplaces, there's 5 elements that I think really help drive demand. The first one is a price advantage. So that's having the best price or at least price parity with other marketplaces. If you are the best price to get a service or get a product, that will naturally help you aggregate and keep demand because customers will want to come back simply for the price advantage alone. Amazon is a fantastic example of this. As we'll talk about with Sesame, Sesame is also leaning on price advantage as a key differentiator. The second thing is to have exclusive supply. So if you have supply available on your marketplace that is not available on other marketplaces, then that's a reason for people to come to your marketplace because they want access to that supply. Really good examples of that are Etsy has a lot of exclusive supply. Turo has a lot of really good exclusive supply, especially if you're comparing it to the traditional rental car market. The third advantage is having some sort of discoverability advantage, which is making it easier to find relevant supply on your marketplace. And an interesting corollary to that is making it hard to cross-shop supply against other marketplaces. So for example, on Amazon, if you're looking at a product, they might have the best price, but you know what product you're looking at. And oftentimes you can look at it in other marketplaces to see if they have a better price. And so for that reason, a price advantage is even more important. It's the same with hotels, as I'll talk about with Tripadvisor. If I find a particular hotel, I can shop around for what is the best price per night. But that's very different than, for example, Airbnb, where when you're looking at a vacation rental, it's hard to search for that vacation rental on another network and compare prices. So if you have a discoverability advantage, including both finding supply as well as not being able to cross-shop supply, that can be a really significant advantage. Airbnb is a good example of that. Fair is another good example. You can do some cross-shopping, but it is more challenging. The fourth element is to have a trust advantage. People will often prefer to do business with a marketplace that they trust, that's willing to offer some guarantees in terms of fulfillment and delivery and things of that sort, versus going directly to a supplier who they may not know, especially if they might be going to different suppliers for different products. And so if you can be a safer place for people to transact, people will come to you initially and on a repeated basis. I think the very best example of that is Uber and Lyft. There's no way I would hop into a stranger's car and let them drive me from one place to another, but I do it multiple times a month using Uber and Lyft, and that's because they've created a trust advantage both by vetting their drivers as well as by offering insurance and things of that sort. StockX and RealReal are really good examples as well, where they have an authentication layer, which helps you know that if you're buying a product on their platform, they are willing to guarantee that that product is authentic, which you don't get when you're buying peer-to-peer. And then the last advantage is a fulfillment advantage. If you can offer a better purchasing experience and a better delivery experience of that service or product, that's a way to both capture demand and keep demand. I think 2 really interesting examples of this are Upwork. So Upwork has built a lot of really interesting tools to be able to talk to freelancers, to be able to structure projects, to be able to have milestones that you pay. So the experience of working with a freelancer on Upwork is actually much better than going peer-to-peer. Another really interesting example for the gamers in the audience is Steam. So Steam is a platform where you can purchase games to play. You can play those games on your PC, but increasingly Steam has been getting into hardware. And so some of the, they have this new hardware device called the Steam Deck, and it's a portable gaming device similar to a Nintendo Switch. And it's one of the very best places to play your Steam games. And so they're creating an advantage both in terms of how you purchase the games, but also how those games are experienced. And so those are 5 things that I think are really helpful as a way for marketplace founders to think about how to create and sustain an advantage, focusing on having the best price, focusing on having exclusive supply, having a discoverability advantage so that supply is easier to find on your platform than other platforms, having a trust advantage so that customers want to come directly to you and trust that they'll get what they want and need from your platform, and then having a fulfillment advantage, making the experience of buying and using whatever the person discovers through your marketplace better through your marketplace than through other places they may transact.
Yeah, no, these are all great topics that we're always chatting through in the community. So it's going to be a super helpful framework and also examples that you provided for us there. So, I wanted to spend some time actually going back to your experience at Tripadvisor, since that was a early travel marketplace and one that I think we can learn a lot from since it, evolved. And I believe you mentioned on a previous podcast, I think it was the first round interview, about how it transitioned into being more of a transactional in nature marketplace. So could you maybe walk us through what led to that shift, and then how you were able to actually pull it off?
Yeah, so Tripadvisor is a really interesting company. It was founded in 2000, so it's 25 years old now. It's one of these original Web 1.0 companies. Unfortunately, they started a travel company right before September 11th, and that was a existential event for the company. And so they had to figure out really quickly, how do we create a profitable business? And the insight was that with the web, you could make a decision on which hotel you wanted to go to based on the reviews and opinions of other travelers versus just having to rely on a travel agent. Because back in 2000, if you wanted to book a vacation, you'd walk into a travel agent's office. They would hand you 3 different brochures with 3 different prices, and you would have to pick between them, not really knowing which hotel was going to be better, and having all of them look absolutely beautiful from the brochure. And so one of the interesting things is that it turned out that this user-generated review model was also a perfect match, not only for what customers wanted, but also for the growing opportunity around SEO. And so Tripadvisor was able to create this incredibly effective SEO flywheel by having millions of reviews constantly coming in that were fresh and indexable to feed the Google algorithm. So across millions of different searches, Tripadvisor would be the #1 organic result. And so from 2000 to 2012, the company built a really strong business there, $1 billion a year revenue business. It was part of Expedia and then got rolled out as an independent public company. And as an independent public company, the company started to ask itself, well, what's next for us? And it was pretty clear that the problem that Tripadvisor needed to solve was that people were coming through Tripadvisor rather than to Tripadvisor. So they would search on Google, they would come read some reviews, and then as soon as they wanted to get serious about a particular hotel, they wanted to see prices, they maybe wanted to book, they would have to leave Tripadvisor. And as a result, people actually didn't really understand the value that Tripadvisor was playing. And so Tripadvisor had this really leaky bucket. It was only monetizing a very small fraction of the transactions that Tripadvisor informed. And so the company decided to add the ability to both price shop as well as to book on Tripadvisor, both for hotels as well as for restaurants and attractions. And so that started around 2012, 2013. Tripadvisor started to move from a really ad-oriented, user-generated content platform to more of a transactional marketplace, both through internal product innovation as well as through acquiring a couple of critical companies like Viator for attraction bookings and La Fourchette for restaurant reservations.
And that's really interesting to learn more about. So I guess that's of course like at a later stage. But how would you advise founders and teams, maybe a little bit earlier stages, thinking about making a shift in their marketplace today?
Definitely, I think it's really important to go through that framework as a way to sort of bulletproof the thinking. For Tripadvisor, moving into a hotel marketplace hasn't gone as well as the company wanted, but moving into more of an attraction marketplace has. And that framework can help to illustrate why. So if we look at Tripadvisor through the lens of that framework, The first one is having a price advantage. And Tripadvisor, as a hotel booking platform, doesn't really have a price advantage. It was getting a lot of its supply through networks like Expedia, Affiliate Network, or Booking.com. And so pretty much had price parity rather than any sort of price advantage. So booking on Tripadvisor didn't really offer customers a better price. Secondly, most of the supply that was on Tripadvisor, the hotel supply, was also on Booking and Expedia. Hotels have every incentive to list their hotel rooms everywhere that they could book. And so Tripadvisor, unlike Airbnb, for example, didn't really have any sort of exclusive supply for hotels. It was easier to find really good hotels on Tripadvisor. So there was some advantage there to coming to Tripadvisor to find a hotel, but it's also really easy to cross shop a hotel on Tripadvisor against other sites. And so there's sort of like a medium discovery advantage, but it wasn't really significant. And then in terms of trust advantage, Tripadvisor had some trust advantage because people trusted the reviews. But if people had never booked before on Tripadvisor, there was also some trust headwinds. The biggest anxiety that a person has when they're booking travel, especially vacation travel, is the hotel going to have my reservation when I show up? And that's a nightmare scenario that you show up at a hotel, you thought you were good to go, you thought your vacation was all set, and they've lost your reservation. And so people trust booking directly with the hotel, or they trust booking with a marketplace like Booking.com that they've booked before that has some guarantees. And then lastly, the question of like a fulfillment advantage. Does Tripadvisor make purchasing and staying at a hotel better than purchasing with Booking or Expedia or others? And that was, again, there wasn't a significant advantage there. So Tripadvisor over the years has had a harder time sort of moving into hotel booking, but on the other hand, has been able to build a strong and fast-growing business around attractions. And for some of the reasons that we just talked about, there's more of an advantage there. Tripadvisor would often have the best price on attractions. Tripadvisor had a lot of exclusive supply of attractions and tour guides and things of that sort. It's easier to discover attractions on Tripadvisor. Using the power of traveler reviews, you can find the good things really easily. It's also hard to cross-shop attractions and tours against other sites. There's a trust advantage because of the reviews, and there's a fulfillment advantage. Most of the attractions and tours that Tripadvisor has relationships with are direct relationships, and so Tripadvisor can do things like digital passes, skip the line passes, booking, being able to provide critical information like what you need to bring with you, where you go to pick up the bus, that sort of thing. And so if we use that framework, we can kind of see like Tripadvisor didn't have much of an advantage in terms of being a hotel marketplace, but had some really distinct advantages in terms of being an attraction marketplace.
And that's a great example of the framework applies. I feel like we could probably have an entire group chat just discussing, Tripadvisor, some of your experience and learnings there. But, I wanted to move on to a topic that's actually come up more recently with founders in the community. And that's right after the kind of like post-product market fit stage is, moving from a product being founder-led to hiring your first PM. So how do you advise founders think about hiring their first PM? And do you have any tips for doing so?
Yeah, definitely. I think product has been going through an interesting thing recently where, some companies have been talking about either getting rid of or reducing their product managers considerably. And so there's some, I think, angst for people that have built a product career. I think one of the things that is true is that a company may not need product managers, but it absolutely needs product management. And so this is something that startup founders are very familiar with. When you start a company, it's critical that you have a really good product management discipline. And if we think about product management as a discipline, there's really three core activities. One is understanding what customers want. Two is turning that into a working product that serves those customers. And three is translating that product into value for the business. So those three things are critical from the day a company is founded all the way through the entire company lifecycle. For pre-PMF startups, it's usually the case that founders and early employees are doing that product management work. And so you don't need a dedicated product manager. And the question, I think the first question to ask around hiring your first PM is, do we have enough of that work? Do we have enough of that customer discovery work, that implementation work, that strategy work, that now we need a full-time person dedicated to this? And if you do, then it can make sense to hire a PM because that person will have more than enough things to do. If you don't, then it's too early to hire a PM. And as like a very, very rough benchmark, I think that starts to happen when you have about 5 engineers. That is the minimum, I think, number of engineers where you can support a full-time PM. Ideally, it's more than that. A lot of companies have sort of a PM to engineering ratio of 7 or 10 or higher, but 5 is sort of the minimum to hire a full-time PM. And so if you feel like the team has grown well enough that you've got enough product management work to do that you can support a full-time person, and it would be advantageous to have someone who's like really dedicated to the craft, then it makes sense to hire a PM. But I think that PMs for early stage startups look very different than PMs for established companies. The work is very different. If you're a PM at Facebook, a lot of your day is spent around process and stakeholder management and just the internal complexities of organizational communication and implementation. But a PM at a startup has a completely different job. The first thing I think it's really important to look for is a PM that has some builder skills. So ideally someone who's either deep in engineering or design or analytics that can really get their hands dirty. So they can be hands-on. They're not afraid to get their hands dirty. They're able to talk directly to customers and willing to do that. A lot of PMs at big tech companies talk to customers once a quarter and they get really excited about it because it's like a unique thing that they get to do, versus at a startup, you need to talk to customers every single day and you need to be really like bold and extroverted, right? You got to be able to pick up the call, do a cold call to a customer, and get really good data and be really helpful to them. I think it's important that that person have an opinion and a vision about the area that you're building your marketplace in. They don't necessarily need prior experience, but it's helpful if they have good product sense, and it's helpful if that they have strong opinions. And so I think a principle there is to hire people that have strong opinions weakly held. So they have strong opinions, but they're willing to listen to others. They need to be really business minded, so not just committed to building a product, but really helping your company flourish. And then they need to be really empowered. So sometimes I think early founders make the mistake of hiring a PM that's essentially a bird dog for them. They're hiring an assistant or a chief of staff rather than a PM. A really full-fledged PM who's great at the things that we just talked about will be someone who benefits from having autonomy, and someone who is enabled and empowered within the org rather than someone who's just doing implementation work. That can be that doesn't need to be a product manager. That can be a project manager or someone else. And then the last thing, which I've kind of learned over the years, is the first PM should be obsessive about product quality, because there is so much about whether you win or lose in the early days that is about does your product work well for customers. Certain PMs are very strategy focused and they're about the big picture. Others are much more in the details and they are obsessive about making sure that they're testing, that the right things work in the right way, that something is high quality from a technical standpoint, from a customer standpoint, from a business standpoint. And that person will be much better equipped to help you get to where you need to go than someone who wants to kind of stay at the high level details and thinks about quality as a QA person's problem or the engineer's problem or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's going to be super helpful. Probably lead to some questions here when we get to the group Q&A. So we might have to go through and summarize that and kind of create a checklist for our founders in the community as well. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Another topic that I actually wanted to talk about, and we couldn't have a conversation with you without bringing up is of course AI, since we've seen the rise of it, right? And how do you think AI is going to impact marketplaces?
So I've been spending a lot of time with AI. Outpace was early on to AI. We started working with generative AI prior to ChatGPT and finding some really interesting things around it. We built some interesting things there. I've also done some side projects on AI to make sense of qualitative user feedback data, so qualitative survey data, other types of qualitative data. I've been using it to kind of get back to some of my engineering skills. I'm incredibly excited about it. I haven't been this excited about technology in a long time. I think it's going to have pretty profound impacts on marketplaces. Um, I think that it's going to have impacts that are hard to predict. And so for me right now, I think the understanding the impact of AI on marketplaces is really a matter of framing the right questions rather than having all the answers, because I don't think people have the answers yet. I think there's three questions for marketplace founders that are really critical with respect to AI. The first one is, where can AI better connect demand with supply? So AI can serve a really important role in making sure that someone in your marketplace can find the product or the service that they need. We've already seen AI play a really important role. Personalization algorithms, the TikTok algorithm, the Facebook algorithm, Amazon's personalization algorithms, all are examples of AI working at a really important and fundamental level to enable products to be better. People talk about, there's a lot of talk right now about TikTok and whether or not it makes sense to divest TikTok to the US market with or without the algorithm. And a lot of people have said, like, this company's worthless without the algorithm. That's how important that particular AI personalization and discovery algorithm is to that business. And the same is true across other marketplaces. And so the first question to ask, which is already something that we're deep into, is where can you use AI, generative and otherwise, to better connect demand with supply? I think the second question, which becomes more pertinent with generative AI, is how can an AI change how supply is fulfilled? So when someone makes a purchase on your platform and starts to use a product or service, there might be things that AI can do in order to make that fulfillment experience better. So one example from the company I'm working with right now, Sesame, is we have a marketplace where patients can connect directly with doctors. Potentially a generative AI agent can provide a first line of service, such as the intake experience for doctors or for law firms or for other things, where AI can have a conversation with a customer before they actually meet with the person that's going to provide the service. And as a result of that conversation, provide really important information to the service provider, and then also improve the customer's experience as a result, make it more efficient, more personalized, more effective. And then the third question is, where can AI replace supply entirely? There will be increasingly large areas where an AI agent, a chatbot, can take the place of a supplier. In certain cases, that might be providing diagnosis for someone in a medical setting. There's going to be AIs focused on delivering certain forms of therapy, certain forms of coaching, certain forms of education and tutoring. Khan Academy is doing some really interesting work around using AI in concert with their content, which I think threatens other tutoring and educational marketplaces. So 3 key questions, I think, for marketplace founders to think through. Where can AI help you better connect supply with demand? Where can AI provide a better fulfillment experience when someone's interacting with a service provider or a product on your platform? And then 3, where is AI going to replace your supply entirely?
Cool. So we're actually going to jump into questions here in a little bit because I'm getting some questions from founders. But, right before we do, so you, of course, have worked with lots of earlier stage marketplace founders and teams as well. So, what do you see as some of the biggest mistakes that, founders and teams make? And then maybe even, specifically when it comes to product?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake really comes down to speed. And so when people think about a startup moves quickly, they're actually conflating 2 things, right? Startups don't move faster than big companies. Big companies have thousands of people, they have millions or billions of dollars. They can move really, really fast. So bigger companies always have a velocity advantage versus smaller companies. Where startups move faster than bigger companies is in latency. A startup can go from an idea to testing it out really, really quickly. At a large company with millions of dollars and hundreds or thousands of people, if you have an idea for a new product, it could take 6 months just to go through the process of doing a go, no go to decide whether or not you want to invest in an MVP, then another 6 months to build the MVP, then another 6 months to analyze the results. All of a sudden, you're talking about an order of a year or two to generate a new product, versus startups can, on a particular day, decide they want to do something and launch it later that day or the next day. And so latency, not velocity, is your advantage as a startup. And if you can really speed up that learning loop by decreasing the latency between when you have an idea and when you start to get some validation for that idea, you're going to significantly increase your odds of succeeding as any type of business, but particularly in terms of marketplaces where you have so many other factors for sort of succeeding, because you're building, you've got this chicken and egg problem. You're building a much more complicated business. So I think that's the number one thing: is don't spend too much time overbuilding. Focus on decreasing your latency and increasing your speed of learning.
That's going to be very helpful. So you got a few head nods when you mentioned marketplaces can be complex as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So we're going to jump into the group Q&A here. Hey, Dimitri, do you want to come on?
Yeah. I have a question that kind of goes back to your Tripadvisor days and the review work that you were talking about and the importance of trust in marketplaces. So I think a lot of founders face this choice between improving the review system and making sure that works really well versus working on how, let's say, sellers are presented to customers, like through things like ranking or through matching. And if you're thinking about what would be the most fruitful path, is it to tinker with the review system, how ratings are displayed, that stuff? Or is it to take those internal signals and then feed them into the ranking machine, which sort of kind of places the burden of matching on the platform rather than the customer kind of digesting all the information that's in reviews and ratings?
I think it depends a lot on how important reviews are as a trust signal for your users. And that could change over time. For example, Uber in the early days, reviews were absolutely critical because people were trying this service for the first time. And so Uber would basically force you to review a driver, and then actually drivers would review riders, and they would show the reviews very prominently. And they needed that social proof as a way to create trust. But over time, there was enough brand awareness around Uber, there was enough comfort with it, that reviews could take a back seat, and other things like some of the rider safety features took increased importance in terms of the trust signal. So I think the question that answer is, what is going to drive trust in our marketplace given where we are in our marketplace's life cycle? And if that is social proof, then focusing on the reviews can be really important. But you might find that there's other things that are essential, right? So for example, for doctors, yes, part of it is social proof. People like to see that doctors have been well reviewed, but their credentials are really important. The types of patients that they see are really important. So there's some other trust signals that are important. So for Sesame, for example, reviews are important, but they're not the most important thing to focus on in terms of discoverability and increasing conversion on the platform.
That's a great question. Mehta, do you want to come on? So you sent me a message.
Hi. As an early stage marketplace where the team size is basically the founder with like industry knowledge, an engineer and an operations person, like how do you approach that PM like decision-making process when there's definitely not going to be consensus on what to focus on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple things can help. One is having a culture around disagree and commit. So it's really important to surface everyone's perspective, because that's going to make any decision that you come to a better decision. But it's also equally important to identify who's going to be the person that makes that decision, and then for everyone to commit to making that decision as successful as possible. And a key part of disagree and commit that doesn't get talked about a lot is what's really important about creating a disagree and commit culture is not the disagree and committing. It's actually following up a month later or 2 months later when you have some data. And you could say, we looked at this decision. It turned out to be right. And so we're happy that everyone committed to it. We're going to continue to double down on it. Or, we took this decision. There was a lot of disagreement. Turns out it was the wrong decision. Here's all the reasons why. We're going to make another decision. And the people who disagreed might feel vindicated and might feel like, wow, this is a place I really want to continue to contribute to, because it's not the case that people want to be in control and always making every decision. It is the case that people want to be heard. And so if you can create a disagree and commit culture where people feel like they're heard, that's really important. Then the other thing I think is also important is shifting the mindset. I think at large companies that have a lot of data, people get into the mode of everything has to be statistically significant. Like, we're not going to make a decision if we don't have statistically significant data. And that's flawed in a lot of ways, in part because the confidence interval for statistical significance is 95%. So you're wrong 1 out of 20 times, which is not an incredible hit rate anyway. And so I think especially for early stage founders who don't have as much data to work with, instead of talking about statistical significance, talk about informed conviction. Where have we gotten enough data points that we have conviction and we're informed by those data points, and now we've got enough conviction to move forward? You're always going to get more data points. There's always going to be more data to find. You don't need to get it all. You don't need to get to a 95% confidence interval. You just need to get to a point where you are informed and you have conviction and you're ready to commit to a particular direction.
That's going to be super helpful. So I feel like sometimes as early stage founders, we by default kind of do the disagree and commit, but forget to do the follow-up, right?
The follow-up is super important. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Michael, do you want to come on? And then we'll try to squeeze you in right after that, Dave, if we can.
Sure. Thank you, Ravi, for taking the time to answer our questions here. I'm super interested in when you were talking about generative AI and use in marketplaces, the second one that you mentioned, which is potentially like first line of defense for customer questions, answers about the platform, or even answers about the supply side. I happen to think that that could be better than humans. My question for you is the demand side ready for that? And how do you roll it out in a way that, given that the first generation of chatbots were so bad, how do you do it in a way that doesn't put off your consumers because they're not talking to an actual human being initially?
Yeah, I think the demand side is ready, especially given just the prominence of AI, the number of people using these chat interfaces. So I think they're more ready than they ever have been. And there's been a step change in readiness over the last 18 to 24 months. But you raise a really, really good question, which is chat the right interface? And I think in most cases, chat is not a great interface. It puts a lot of work on the person to type in a lot of content, to know what questions to ask, and then to pull from the chatbot the answers that you want. Instead, I think there will be other interfaces that are more guided and more structured that enable a better communication with the person. A really good example of this, there's not great examples of this yet, but one that I like is Formless, which is a product by Typeform, which enables you to create a generative AI-backed survey. Right now the functionality is a little bit limited, they can definitely expand on it, but it's a new product. And what it does is it shifts the onus from I, as the consumer, have to ask questions to the AI is actually asking me questions. And that changes the dynamic a lot. If you can do that, plus add in structured responses so that you can tap and click your way through the generative AI experience, I think that takes a lot of the friction out and will create an experience that is much more, I think, palatable to customers. So, for example, another really interesting example of this doesn't use AI, but Row and Hims are both really good examples of great intake flows. Row will ask you 40 questions before you convert. That goes against everything related to conversion rate optimization, right? It's supposed to be the shortest path to conversion, not the longest. But Row is a very long path. and they ask you a set of questions along the way that help you understand what's on offer, what your options are as a patient, which help you learn more about the different treatments. And that ultimately, when you convert as a much more qualified and informed patient. And I think taking those static intake experiences and putting a generative AI layer on top will be the next chapter of how that goes. I could see legal marketplaces doing that. I could see that working in a lot of different places.
That's a great question. We're going to try to squeeze in one last question here if we can. Hey, Dave, do you want to come on?
Yeah, sure. My question was about how Google's incorporating AI into their SERPs. And my worry is that SEO traffic as a channel is going to decline. And it seems like there's some studies that have been done that back that up. And I have this fear that marketplaces in general, they're not preparing for this.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, one, do you agree that this is coming and it's a problem? And then secondly, what would you recommend doing about it? My thoughts were increase your direct traffic, your app downloads, and then also maybe build some community. But what do you think?
I absolutely agree it's a problem. To some extent, the problem has been unfolding for the last 7 years. You can see this very acutely in the travel space. Google has gotten increasingly aggressive about trying to handle the person's travel query on their site rather than having them go to Tripadvisor or Booking.com. They show hotel booking widgets and flight booking widgets, which you can sort of think about as generative responses in a certain way. And that's led to, interesting evolutions in Booking.com's business versus Airbnb's business. Booking.com still depends on a lot of their traffic from Google, both from SEO and from paid search, and has a relatively high CAC as a result. Airbnb is not as SEO dependent or as paid search dependent. They've been able to build a really good base of users that are using their product directly, in part because the searchability of their supply is such that you have to go to Airbnb. You can't search for it on Google, which is, goes to some of the search advantage that we talked about earlier. And so I think this is absolutely a challenge for marketplaces. I don't think it's going to be apocalyptic. Google has too much wrapped up in their search business to kind of let generative AI completely undermine that business. But I do think it puts extra emphasis on marketplace founders to understand what are the marketing channels that really work and how do we do a good job of converting a one-time user into a recurring user so that we don't have to reacquire them in the future.
That's great. Great last question. So we're almost out of time here, but wow, Ravi, we have really packed the insights in here. So I appreciate, taking the time to join us and, chatting through everything here. So actually I had one last question for you before we wrap things up. And that's if you could go right back to before, the world of marketplaces, maybe at a Tripadvisor, what would you tell yourself about them specifically?
I think a number of things. One is to be really clear about the customer need, because ultimately the marketplace is the model, but it's not really the product from the customer's perspective. I think the idea of jobs to be done is really important. And, ultimately the customer doesn't care if they get that job done through a marketplace, if they get it done by transacting directly with a seller, if they get it done by AI. And so really important, I think, is to put that customer need first. And then to understand how does being a marketplace really help deliver on that customer need. And oftentimes there's a price advantage, right? Because by being a marketplace, suppliers can compete. There's a selection advantage. You can have lots of different things available for that customer. There's some advantages around discovery. So a person may not know exactly what they want, and a really broad marketplace can help them figure that out. So I think to think about yourself as a consumer business or a customer-driven business, if it's B2B, first, and then as a marketplace, as a lever to deliver on that, rather than to think about yourself centrally as a marketplace business.
Yeah, those are going to be a great tips and kind of a parting advice for us here as well. So, no, last but not least, time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, so just search for me, Ravi Mehta. You can also go to ravimehta.com, and I have some articles there. I also have a Substack, which I've only posted to once. So my goal for this year is to start writing some more, so we'll see if that happens.
Yeah, Well, you'll definitely have a lot of earlier stage marketplace founders and even teams here coming your way after this. So we really appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us here for this group chat. It was definitely good to have you on as a follow up, and thanks everyone for the great questions today.